It's time to step into the Coming Out Lounge, a cool, safe space to be true to your sexual self. With your host, Rick Clemens. Rick has helped hundreds of people come out of the closet, and now each week he's bringing you cool insights for loving and accepting yourself, boosting your self-confidence, and living a guilt-free, purpose-filled life on the other side of the closet doors. Cuddle up with yourself and get ready for heartwarming coming out stories, ideas for living authentically, and tips for being fully self-expressed. Now here's your host, Coming Out Coach Rick.
Hey, closet busters and closet dwellers. It is time once again for the Coming Out Lounge. And I know we've all heard the saying, you're going to keep being taught the lesson until you learn it. But I'm not so sure that today's guest needed to learn a lesson. But she's had plenty of lessons that she's learned in her 50 plus years here on the planet. Everything from man of the world to woman on purpose. She's finally found herself at a little bit more than age 50 and said, I am woman, and you're going to hear me roar. And today we're going to cover everything from relationships and parenting to professional work life and moving through life in somewhat of a little bit of a stealth mode as we explore one woman's beautiful journey to finally letting herself out of the bag to live her truth. Now, I met Stephanie just a few weeks ago as we were both at a college getting ready to speak. She didn't realize she was going to be speaking that evening, but she was observing a panel, and I ended up being the only panel member that showed up. And this is where divine intervention really steps into play. And I knew I could, and I knew I couldn't carry this thing for 2.5 hours. Well, I probably could have carried it for 2.5 hours on my own, but I didn't want to. And I pulled her up to the front and said, I realize you're just observing, but you're going to play if you want to play with me. And I'm so glad I did, because what I'm about to share with you is just a really beautiful person. And I'm so excited to have you here on the podcast today, Stephanie. So welcome to the Coming Out Lounge.
Thank you. It's very good to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. And, I walked away from that evening just really feeling like, you know what, I've had a few people on the show who have been part of my transgender family, and each one has such a beautiful story. Each one has little interesting twists and turns, as we all do as people having this human experience. Yours was particularly fascinating to me because I could see this just beautiful soul that was just kind of like, yeah, this is kind of what happened, and this is who I am, and I found a way to be me, and especially coming from a kind of a man's world. Why don't we just start with, when did Stephanie really appear in the world as we know her today?
Well, as I am today, that's hard to say. Stephanie, as you know her today, has been bubbling under the surface and sort of cooking, if you will.
Yep.
My transition started when I was 50, but I envisioned the woman that I was several years before that. Mm-hmm. And when I was 4, I thought I was a girl. And then at the onset of puberty, that's when it became very, very apparent that something was happening that wasn't right. Mm-hmm. And I developed over the years, and I reached my breaking point, and
it's really been, but that's why, it has been a process, and that's why I asked the question, because I wanted to bring this home that there is no end goal, so to speak. It's just we've moved through our journeys. I mean, if anybody said, so you're finally fully a gay man, I'm like, well, I guess in some way I am, but I'm still growing. I'm getting older. I'm learning things about myself. I'm finding things about myself. I don't know that you can just say, okay, yes, this is me. This has been part of who you've been for so long, but to say, okay, maybe physical manifestation, when did Stephanie really start to show up, was at age 50, but she's been bubbling below the surface for many years and through
my entire life.
Right, and through a few marriages, right?
Yes, 3 marriages.
Wow.
But I kind of joke around and say the second one didn't count. It was kind of a flash in the pan. Mm-hmm. But 3 marriages, 2 beautiful children with my first marriage. Mm-hmm. And I helped raise a stepdaughter in my 3rd marriage. But all my relationships failed one after the other. And I have a feeling it's because of who I was on the inside.
Right.
It just didn't jive with what was going on. Getting in a relationship with a girl when I was in male form, it always helped the dysphoria subside. It was kind of like a drug. It was a temporary fix. And as each relationship got comfortable, the dysphoria would come back, and it would come back stronger and stronger each time until I eventually reached a breaking point.
Mm. And how did you know that this was the breaking point? I mean, there must have been something that you're like, okay, just can't do this any longer. What was kind of that inciting event for you?
Well, there was, after my third divorce, there was a girl that I met because I had to run from one relationship to another. Mm-hmm. My drug to help me feel comfortable stuck in that male form, and also living vicariously through all the women that I had intimate relationships with. But there was somebody I had met online, and the first date was super romantic, and it didn't go anywhere physically. That was part of the magic of the evening. Mm-hmm. And then every time we saw each other after that, it kind of fizzled into the friend zone. Mm. And we were going to go out on one last date and see if we could make a go of it, see if we could, see if there was a spark or not, and see if we were just going to remain friends. And she was studying for a master's in psychology, which coincidentally, my third wife, she got her PhD in psychology, and I was with her through getting her master's and through her PhD, and she taught a human sexuality class, and that's kind of a tangent. This love interest, we were just taking a walk after dinner, and we were just walking around downtown San Diego, and she said, "There's something about you. I don't know what it is. There's something deep and maybe dark inside you that you keep buried way down deep that you're afraid to show people." Mm-hmm. And that really hit home. Mm. And I don't know how many of your listeners know the show Dexter, and I talked about this a little bit on the panel discussion. Dexter, he was a serial killer, and he called his urge to kill his dark passenger. Mm. And I love that show, but I called, my inner woman, I called that my pink passenger. And so she was saying, there's something dark, deep and dark, that you keep deep way down inside, keep it suppressed. I was thinking, oh, if she only knew. It's not something dark, it's something pink.
Right.
So it just really triggered me. I went home that evening, and it was July 25th, 2013, and it was a Thursday. I went home that evening, and I hadn't researched, the surgery or just anything about being transgender or transitioning in many, many years. I remember when I was 19 reading an article about Tallulah. Mm-hmm. She was, actress and a model, and she even had a small part in a Bond film. She was one of 10 girls in bikinis out by the pool during, I think, Goldfinger. Right. And I remember reading the article that outed her when it first came out. And if I remember the timeline correctly, I was around 19 years old. And I remember reading about the surgeries and how they just weren't what they are today. Right. And you basically have, a cavity there, but it's not sensate, it's not functional. Well, you can use it. How much graphic detail can I go into?
Oh, you can go wherever you want to go. This is the beauty of podcasting is we can say whatever we want to say here. So, and what I loved about, one of the things I would love the listeners to know is one of the reasons I just really loved being with Stephanie on this panel was she wasn't afraid to go anywhere. I mean, she wasn't afraid to be really transparent. And those of you who listen to me all the time pretty much know I'm pretty much Mr. Transparency. So yet another reason why I wanted her to come here, because I know we could have these talks about, there was a cavity, but there was no sensation. And, these are the things that I think people are so curious about, yet we're so curious as human beings. But then there's, I believe in being politically correct, but sometimes I think we get too politically correct, and in order to help things change and help us to grow into understanding, we need to ask the real raw questions,
Yeah.
So it sounds like for you that this was really the inciting moment, but yet she'd always been there. She's always been there within you. And I think all of us, I know myself as a gay man, yes, I had my little dark person that kind of hid over there in the corner, but each time I had an experience or I allowed myself to be free in that little person who wasn't really such a little person came forward and said, you know, I need to be free. I need to be who I am. And it sounds like
you need to be out in the real world.
Yeah. And it sounds like the same thing was going on for you.
Oh, yeah. I was pleasantly surprised that night to find information on the surgeries and how far they had come and how everything can be fully functional and anatomically correct. Mm-hmm. And I watched, I don't know how many transition videos that night. I don't think I went to bed that night. And I was surprised to find out how much more common it was today than it was a couple of decades ago. And it was a big relief. And it was kind of like there was no decision, no conscious decision that I'm going to transition now. That was the onset of it. It just started happening. I like to say, you know, it was like somebody flipped my switch. Yeah. Or I compare it to pushing a huge boulder uphill my entire life. And you can't even see the top of the hill. You don't even know if there is a top of the hill. And then one day, that huge boulder, all the weight of that boulder just starts, you crest the hill and it starts rolling down the other side all on its own, and you have to start running and chasing after it. And that's kind of how my transition started. I kind of want to loosely compare it to a nervous breakdown. People that have a nervous breakdown, you don't say, oh, you know, I've had enough and I'm just going to have a breakdown now. No, you reach a breaking point.
Sure.
Similar to, I have 1,000 analogies about this, similar to filling a cup. You eventually reach the rim and it starts flowing over. I had to bust out and it just started happening. It just took off.
But prior to this, had you had any, you know, had you voyeured into cross-dressing or anything at that point? Or was it just like,
all
okay.
All the time. Oh my God. Yeah. Ever since I was probably in junior high, you know, maybe even younger. Maybe I think around 10 years old. I would sneak into my mom's closet and wear her stuff when I was the only one home. And I remember one time she came home and she found some clothes messed up in the closet and she started screaming and yelling. And I told her I was playing hide and go seek with one of my friends after school and that they had already left. But it was all messed up because I was wearing her clothes. And then when I started, you know, having girlfriends, they would leave clothes over and I would wear it. Yeah, I think I lived with a couple of girls before my first marriage. And, you know, I would always find myself, once that relationship started getting comfortable and dysphoria would creep in, I would start wearing their clothes. And this was a repeat pattern. When I was in between relationships, I started buying clothes. I'd order stuff online. And every time I got into a relationship, I would take it all and I would throw it in the dumpster. And I did that maybe 3 times in my life.
Wow.
Yeah. And before I had met that love interest after my third marriage, I had started that trend again. I started buying clothes, buying shoes. At that point in my life, I could actually afford some really nice stuff. So it's like I'm thinking, well, if I get in a relationship, I can't just take this stuff and throw it in the dumpster. And that night that everything happened, it's like, oh no, there's a reason I'm feeling this way, the reason I'm keeping this. Everything just started falling into place and moving forward.
So you use the terminology that dysphoria creeping in. Talk a little bit about what that really was like. I mean, it's not just the little pink girl off in the corner coming out to play. There must have been some comfort, some warmth, some fear. All of those things must have been showing up each time that dysphoria started coming out to play, so to speak.
Well, the dysphoria was the anxiety, the discomfort, the dissatisfaction, the horrifying feeling of being trapped in that male form. So, like I said, I would jump into a relationship with a girl and it would make me comfortable being stuck in that male role. I had somebody to live vicariously through. I had somebody to kind of put me in that male role and look at me in that male role. And it made it a lot easier to pretend to be that guy. I jump into a relationship with a girl, and like I say, over time, whether it's weeks or months, some cases years, the relationship starts to kind of fizzle out and get comfortable, and then that dissatisfaction, that anxiety about being stuck in that male form would start creeping back in. So that's what would creep back in and force the girl in me that I really was to the surface,
sure,
so to speak. So
how difficult, this is one of those questions that I know people would ask if they felt like they could, and I know I can ask it because you and I had lots of conversations, but how difficult was the sex life part of this for you, to be the male having sex with women?
Well, this is a very interesting, and we didn't touch on this much at the panel.
Mm-mm.
Okay, I was in male form. I had lots of testosterone coursing through my body.
Yep.
I found the female form attractive. In fact, I still do, but I'm not attracted to them, don't sleep with them.
Mm-hmm.
But it was almost like when I had a girl wrapped in my arms and we were just totally in that intimate space where you're doing everything, you're touching each other everywhere, I could get aroused. It was very arousing. It was very sensual. And it's like I wanted to crawl inside them and be them. Trade places with them, but not like in a Silence of the Lambs sort of way.
Right. Nothing quite that creepy, but I get it.
No.
I've talked to other people who had very similar experiences. I mean, and I get it. I know for me, through my early experiences, I don't know, it was like I just enjoyed the moments being with men. And then at times, depending on the guy, especially any guys that were very well built, just masculine, muscular, very well put together, there was almost like, okay, I just want to be within that person, because it then almost justified in a weird way why I was having this attraction. And, I don't remember if I talked about this on the panel, but people who've listened to the show before have heard this. The one of the inciting events in my life is when I had a family member, take me into a sexual arena that I shouldn't have been in at 8 years old. But it was also the moment the light bulb went off and go, oh, okay, now I get this, why I'm so attracted. Because as soon as I saw his big penis, I'm like, oh, okay, now I get this. And I saw his furry little butt, and, not little, but it was, it was like suddenly things started to make sense. But I think that was I'm pretty sure that was probably the very first time that I kind of felt this wanting to be that person,
Yeah.
And it's very fascinating. For other people, I've had other people say it's not that, but I have talked to a lot of people, both in the gay, lesbian, and transgender world, where they're like, yeah, this just came over me. So at this stage of life, how would you identify as?
I identify as a heterosexual female. Yeah, this is the part where it gets a little hard to describe. When I was stuck in male form, I had to have that intimacy with a woman. I had to be with a woman because I wasn't a gay man.
Right.
I wouldn't even let myself look at a man. I was uncomfortable being around men naked. And because here I was, this girl inside, and it creeped me out because I couldn't be in that feminine female form. But I knew that if I could be in that feminine female form, that I would let go and I would embrace it, and I would be able to be around, like when you're in junior high, just think of how uncomfortable you would be if all of a sudden you're thrust into the opposite sex's locker room.
Right.
And this is like onset of puberty, before puberty. It's like, every kid has this fantasy about that, but it's like, no, it really is not that comfortable. So for me, going and showering with guys, or even as an adult, going to the gym, and I would never, shower. I couldn't be around men like that. And I was very homophobic, you could say, because I didn't want people to mistake me for a gay male, because I wasn't. I had this girl inside of me that was the real me trying to get out. So I never wanted to be with a man as a man, but I knew that if I could be a woman, that, externally, that I was on the inside, I knew that I would love to explore that sexuality because I fantasized about it. Whenever I would watch porn, I would identify with the girl and what she's getting and what she's giving, what she's doing, what she's receiving. It's like I wanted to be those girls.
Right.
And I remember having those thoughts as early as, you know, when I was in puberty. You know, every kid experiments watching porn. And so now that I get to be in my feminine form, I was still afraid that, well, what if I go be with men and I don't like it? But I was a natural. It's like, oh, yeah, this girl's been waiting to break out, and I had a lot of catching up to do.
Well, I have to be honest, and I knew I was going to go here, and I don't know if you picked up on it.
Okay,
but
let's do it.
That night when we were standing outside of the classroom, I was like, okay, I don't know her, so, you know, we were waiting for the other person to arrive that never did, and I'm like,
yeah.
Okay. And then you so beautifully said, well, you know, I would represent the trans on the panel. And I actually was like, well, thank God you said that, because I was questioning. I was like, okay, I don't know where to go here, you know? And so I think that's a testament to how you have naturally stepped into this, you know, and positioned yourself, you know, and you are, you know, I love all my trans brothers and sisters, but we know for many trans females, one of the biggest challenges is because of having gone through puberty the wrong direction, so to speak. Many masculine tendencies still show up that make it very difficult at times for them to be stealth in their feminine, you know, presence. And I think you are one of the very lucky ones that, quite honestly, had you not said something to me, and this happened one other time to me with another PFLAG panelist who happened to be a trans man, that I'm like, okay, well, hey, he's just like one of my bros here. I couldn't decide if he was like the parent panelist or, you know, and then when he said it, I'm like, okay, well, that took me by surprise, you know, and I think this is the thing is we all kind of see what we see, and then suddenly we don't really get it until somebody says something, and I think this is testament to what our trans brothers and sisters go through all the time. They constantly fight this. And you indicated, you know, when we were talking on the panel that you've been pretty lucky. You haven't really ever had any episodes where you felt like you got, you know, scared or anything about being who you were. You've been pretty lucky so far.
Yes, I've been very lucky so far. I do have to say, though, the microaggressions that I encounter are, can I say the city I live? Okay, I live in Long Beach. I've lived in the Palm Desert, you know, Palm Springs area. I've lived in San Diego. I lived in Burbank, up in the valley. And I've lived in Seal Beach. Now I'm in Long Beach. Okay, so when I moved from Burbank down here to Seal Beach and Long Beach area, I experienced more microaggressions here than I've experienced, you know, in just the short first few months that I was here. I experienced more microaggressions in that amount of time in this area than I have had in the last 3.5 years of my transition anywhere that I've lived or traveled in the U.S. And I travel all over the U.S. for my job. So it's really kind of weird. And
what do you think the difference is?
I don't know. I know that there's a large community of transgender people down here in Long Beach, particularly trans women. Yep. And I don't know if we're just more of a common sight down here, so we're easier to spot, and the people that don't like us let us know because we're all over the place. I really don't know. I don't know what it is. That's the only logic that I can come up with.
Yeah, that would probably be what I would say is I know that Long Beach does have quite a big population of trans people, especially trans women, and that probably is about as close to accurate as anything I've ever heard, you know, which is it's really rather sad because being that Long Beach is such a LGBTQ community, it's a very embracing community. That doesn't mean we still don't have people in our communities, you know, that are going to cause us problems. Even if they're just microaggressions, as you said, they're still there, you know.
Yeah, they are. And you know, there is a large population of us up in the valley and up in the Hollywood area. But I think, you know, per capita, they're spread out more. We're all spread out up there. Whereas down here, we're in a more concentrated area.
So for you, I know that there's lots we haven't covered, and, I think we are going to have to end up having you come back another time and even share even more. Well, I would too, because I think this is, this is just one of the many different coming out stories that we're telling these days. But what do you feel like's been the most difficult thing so far in the journey once you said, okay, here I am, baby, and now let's go? What's been one of the most challenging things?
Oh, wow. Well, that whole first year when you're starting out, especially the first couple of months,
right,
you're scared shitless. You don't know how you're going to turn out. Right. You don't know how long it's going to take to make that transition to where you feel comfortable. I thought, I love going to concerts and baseball games and football games and boating and just being active and doing things, just everyday life. And I was in a dark place thinking, oh my God, I could never see being anything but that androgynous in between awkward phase that you go through. And I didn't know if I was ever going to be able to go out in public to a concert again, or to a ball game or a NASCAR race or any of that. I didn't know if I was going to lose my job, my career. I didn't know if I was ever going to be able to get hired again. I didn't know how much of my family or friends I was going to lose. It was just scary. It was all difficult.
Well, because it's a brand new journey. That's the thing, is I think so many of us who, it's like, okay, we come out of the closet door, so to speak. It doesn't matter if you're gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer. I don't care what it is. You come through the closet door knowing that this is going to give you a sense of freedom. But on the other side of the door where the freedom is also all the uncertainty, and for you as a transgender person, that uncertainty just goes through the roof compared to, somebody like me, just a gay man, because, okay, I know I'm gay. There isn't any physical transformation that necessarily has to take place. There isn't, a lot of fears other than, well, maybe I might, get beat up, but, my followers know I'm a big, tall guy and I'm not a fighter, but, if somebody tried to do it, I could probably pretty much defend myself.
They're going to have a tough time,
Yeah. I think the thing that's so powerful about the transgender journeys are, so deep within yourself who you are. It's so deep. And as that depth comes forward to the surface, it is the igniting fire that gives you the strength to move forward. But then because the physical manifestation, and depending on where you are, and in your case, 3 marriages and some kids, and, I know you've got potentially some grandbabies coming along the way, all this stuff is where all the uncertainty really starts to play huge havoc on your life.
Oh, yeah.
And it leaves a lot of question marks. I think that's the pieces of the puzzle that we've never really had on this show. I mean, I've talked to other transgender individuals, but nobody yet who has been in the position where you are, where there's a whole other life that's happening still for you. I know we've talked to single transgender people who haven't started families and stuff, or I've had a couple of other transgender females on the show who have got marriages and stuff, but there haven't been any children. So this is like, I'm setting this up so we'll continue the story in another episode with Stephanie, because I think there's so much more that we can talk about, from career to family to all this sort of stuff.
We're scratching the surface.
We're just scratching the surface. And I would just love to continue this conversation in another episode so that we can open up the doorway even more. So let's kind of position this, though. You're in transition right now, correct?
Well, okay. That's a whole nother subject. Do you really have time?
Well, I just want to set that up, that you're kind of in transition. This is not like, I think a lot of people go, okay, well, they do this and it's done. No, not all transgenders go all the way. And some do, some don't.
I see what you're setting up. Yeah.
And some are in the midst of where they're at. And so for you, I think a good kind of cliffhanger would be, we're in transition. And we'll get to the rest of that story, too, in another episode.
Okay, that sounds good.
Does that sound fair? I think I just think we gave them the cliffhanger, so now people are going to go, okay, I definitely want to come back and listen to this one. So
good, I hope so.
So first of all, I so appreciate you being here, but one of the things I always like to have my guests, share is, you could give some piece of wisdom or some advice to people who are, and you can leave this for just the transgender people, or you can leave it for people who are just coming out of, some of my guests are coming out of cancer scares. Some of them are coming out of relationships that just aren't working. But, what would you like to just leave with at least this first part of the episode and share with people?
Well, it's kind of a two-part answer. One, a lot of people are going to say, oh, bullshit, I don't want to hear that.
Right.
But the first thing is, this is going to sound corny, but the first thing is proper mental health. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean you got to go to a shrink. It means proper mental health. Find your center. Figure out what works for you. Get a support group, or, your support group can be close friends and family, or your support group can be, an outside support group with, you mentioned cancer. It could be cancer support. It could be, PFLAG support groups. It could be through your church if you're religious.
Yeah.
Find good mental health, however you have to do that. And if it, for me, I love my two therapists. I love them to death, and they've helped me through a lot of stuff, and my issues have become less about trans and more about just living.
Yep.
The other piece of advice, the second part to this, is move forward. Don't get stuck in victim mode. You have to move forward. And sometimes you have to make the tough decisions. And like you said, you have to open that closet door, and you have to take that first step outside. Yeah. Otherwise, you'll never make it anywhere.
Well, that first step is, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's like something about 1,000 miles is the first step or something like that. I can't remember the exact quote, but without that first step, we don't get moving forward. We will always stay stuck. And regardless of how uncertain the journey may feel and the lack of direction we may feel like we don't have, at least a step is a step. And, oftentimes when people come to me to do the work that they do with coming out, that's the first thing I say is, you did the first step. We don't know where we're headed. Yeah. You may still be very confused about who you are. You may not know if you're gay or lesbian or bi or trans, or maybe you do believe you're gay, but you want to stay in a hetero marriage. We don't know, but you took the first step to start unraveling the pieces of what is your true truth. And oftentimes I think that's the most powerful thing anyone can do, is take that step.
Definitely. And it's okay to be scared, and it's okay not to know what's going to happen, because you take that step and things will fall into place.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited about picking this up and going through the rest of the continuing story in our next episode with Stephanie Poole. She is just a beautiful person, a beautiful woman, just got a beautiful heart. And I knew it the moment I got to speak with her, and I can't wait to share more of the pieces of the puzzle, because you've had some beautiful opportunities in career, and now you've got some interesting new opportunities coming with children and grandchildren, and as you move through to your next phases. And I think that would be the beautiful stuff to pick up, and we'll share that in the next episode. So thank you so much for being here, Stephanie, with me. I so appreciate you, and glad that we had the opportunity to share this time with each other.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I really look forward to returning soon.
Great.
Hey, Closet Dwellers and Coming Out Lounge listeners. I wanted to invite you to check something out. For all the years that I've been a coming out coach, one thing I've learned is sometimes people come to do the work with me, and they only need a little bit of help to get over something very particular and very important to them. It could be reconciling their religion and sexuality. Maybe it's learning how to have the difficult conversations where they say, I'm gay. Possibly it could be, oh my God, I'm out of the closet, but now how do I do this same-sex dating and mating sort of thing? Well, what I can tell you is throughout the years, there are common things that show up over and over and over again. And what I've heard most from my clients and listeners of the podcast is, I want a way to work with you just on these particular subjects. Yay! I'm so excited because I've taken the action and I've made this possible. So how do you find out about these particular programs? You go to thecomingoutcoach.com, or if you're on the show page right now listening to the podcast or have just listened to the podcast, over to the right-hand side of the podcast description, everything is an icon that says one-on-one coaching sessions. Click on that button. You'll be taken to a page that describes each of the different 9 sessions I'm offering. They are one-on-one sessions that we can do via phone, Skype, or even FaceTime. They're very action-oriented. We go right to the topic that you want to talk about. And each of these sessions also includes a copy of my book, Frankly, My Dear, I'm Gay. So what more could you ask for? You get me for 90 minutes devoted to you, plus my book. So go check it out. See if there's something that could help you as you step out, step up, and step in to living your powerful truth. Take care. I'm Rick Clemens, the Coming Out Coach. I look forward to working with you.
You've just experienced the Coming Out Lounge. Go online to www.comingoutlounge.com to learn more and tune in again next week for more stories and tips for being true to yourself.